This is a podcast that I actually think is pretty important. Martha C. Nussbaum is one of our great living philosophers, and she's been working in recent years to put emotions back at the center of not just philosophy, but of how we understand politics. Her new book is called Monarchy of Fear. And I think it's particularly important because fear is the dominant emotion of our political age. It is driving Donald Trump. It is driving reactions to Donald Trump, and understanding it, how it's generated in society, how it's generated in politics, how it's generated in individuals is necessary. It's a precondition, I think, to understanding why politics is what it is and feels the way it feels. The way she does this in the book is pretty interesting. She begins in infancy. She writes, "The discrepancy between the very slow physical development of the human infant and its rapid cognitive development is in many respects a nightmare story." And she's saying there, we become able to know what we want and what we need long before we're able to do it. We are trapped in a body that doesn't work for longer than we're trapped in a mind that doesn't understand. And that creates a real sense of terror. And she goes on to say, "We usually survive this condition, but we do not survive it without being formed and deformed by it. Fear, genetically first among the emotions, persists beneath them all and infects them all, nibbling around the edges of love and reciprocity." This is a hell of a way of understanding not just our politics, but our humanity itself. So, as always, you can email me at ezrakleinshow@vox.com, but I'm pleased to present this conversation with Martha C. Nussbaum. Let's begin here. I think people feel that they understand the ways in which anger and fear, and I want to talk about this one more later, but even hope act in our politics and our political community. But something your book focuses on in some detail is disgust. And I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about the role that plays in your analysis.
Yeah. Now, disgust, when we just don't stop to think, we think that this is something that's purely hardwired. We just got to vomit at certain kinds of things. That, it turns out, is not very true at all, because the psychologists, Paul Rozin in particular, who've done this path-breaking work on disgust, show that it does actually have thought in it, that what you think you're smelling makes the difference as to whether it disgusts you or not. So if you're told that this smell is cheese, you're usually not disgusted. If you're told it's feces, you usually are disgusted. So even what's called primary object disgust has thought in it. It depends on what you think. And then the things that tend to elicit that kind of disgust are all what Rozin calls animal reminders. Reminders, that is. I think he shouldn't have just said animal reminders. He should have said something like mortality reminders, reminders of the decay and fragility and mortality of our own animal bodies. Because, of course, we're not disgusted by strength or speed or beauty, lots of other things that animals have. But then what particularly interests me is that people don't stop there. That might already be problematic enough if you kind of are disgusted by something that is you and it's an important part of you. That's kind of strange, kind of self-hatred that human beings are kind of in. But if we go beyond that to say this group of human beings is more animal than I am, I've risen above the animal, I'm clean, I barely have a body at all, and maybe it's not really an animal body, but these people, whether it's the lower castes in the Indian caste hierarchy, whether it's African Americans, whether it's women, whether it's gay men, particularly gay men. I think disgust rhetoric is usually used toward gay men more than toward gay women. This is a way of subordinating them and saying they're lesser people. They're not really people at all. They're more like animals. And we find this in every society. The forms it takes are different. So I have this research project with a bunch of colleagues where we study it cross-culturally in India and the United States and try to figure out how disgust for the lower castes in India is similar and also different from the kind of racial disgust that inhabited the Jim Crow South, where both involve, we can't share drinking fountains, we can't share lunch counters and so on, but they're different in a variety of ways. So it's worth doing a lot more study of how this works. But we certainly know that disgust is manufactured. It's taught. I mean, I walk into India and I just don't even know who's the lower caste. And it's so interesting that lower caste people know that And they're so happy when some outsider comes in, because then that outsider isn't part of that disgust system with them, and they don't even have a tendency to feel disgust. So it's taught, and it's part of a powerful engine of subordination. And so I think we need to understand that, and that is something that we can certainly change if we bring people up to think that Black bodies are similar to white bodies, not more disgusting, not more animal. Children learn that very quickly, or rather, they don't learn the other thing. So it's hard to unlearn once you learned it. There are stories about how Southern people who learned racial disgust, then they move north, and they actually do vomit when they're seated at a dinner table with people of another race. But if you don't learn it in the first place, you don't have to unlearn it. And so then I think that gives us a powerful message of what we need to do as a society. It is clear that disgust was a very powerful part of subordinating gays and lesbians in our society. I've written a whole lot about this and studied pamphlets, the pamphlet literature that tried to whip up animosity to pass laws against same-sex marriage, or earlier to keep the sodomy laws on the books. They always appeal to disgust, particularly describing anal sex as though it is disgusting, the mixing of feces and blood and so on. So, you see how this operates, and then you quickly see that this is something we better be attentive to. We better not do it, and we better say, as indeed the Supreme Court gloriously did say in Romer versus Evans, well, if that's the basis of a law, then it doesn't even have a rational basis.
Something I was thinking about reading that chapter of your book was something Donald Trump is known for is having quite a strong disgust reaction. He's a very self-admitted germaphobe, likes things to be very orderly, very aggressively cooked, likes all steak well done, talks in terms of disgust a lot. He calls things disgusting constantly. He calls people, and including often women, and you talk a bit about this in your gender chapter, disgusting pigs. He's been heard to say a number of times, that all the refugees and immigrants from Haiti coming here, they have AIDS, which is a classic form that disgust language tends to take against outsiders. And so I was curious, because this step wasn't quite taken in the book, if you see a role that disgust plays in Trump's politics unusually.
Well, there is a certain amount of research done by Rozin students that tends to show that people on the right have a higher score on what's called the D scale. I'm a little mistrustful of that for the following reason, that I think the D scale, as they construct it, doesn't distinguish carefully enough between a rational fear of danger and genuine sort of phobic disgust. For example, the hand washing thing. Now, I myself am a germaphobe, but it's really not disgust. I don't find people's hands disgusting, but I'm a singer. And any singer you ask that person, do you like shaking hands with a lot of people? No, because your livelihood, and well, it's not my livelihood, but it is my hobby, depends on not getting a cold. And that's a prime locus of colds. So if I go into a dinner after a lecture, and it's just standard that they expect you to shake hands with everyone at the table and then sit down to eat, either I find some tactful way of not shaking people's hands, or I go use some hand sanitizer. So, I don't think that's disgust at all. It's just prudence. I also think that when they say that thinking about sex with animals, do you have a negative view of that? And then if the person says, I have a negative view of people having sex with animals, they impute that to disgust. I am an animal rights activist. I think sex with animals is cruelty, and I have a moral objection to it. And it's not disgust. It's I think, a rational moral objection to people using animals as tools. So I think the D scale it's got lots of different things in it, and therefore I don't trust the results of experiments using that scale. But in any case, that's what they claim that they've found. And I do think, quite apart from agreeing with Trump about the handshaking thing, I do think the Indian custom of namaste is a beautiful way of greeting and honoring a person that has no tendency to infect self or others. But in any case, the the thing that is clearly indicative is the way he talks about women's bodies, which really does show disgust again and again. It's what he perceives as excess flesh, he finds disgusting. What he perceives as some sign of like they go to the bathroom, like Hillary taking her bathroom break during the debate. What he perceives as some sign of blood, like somebody might be having her period, he suggests. And then the journalist who he thought she had a facelift and he thought she was bleeding. So all of those are genuine disgust, what I call projective disgust. They are not a rational fear. And yeah, there is something pretty striking about that. And to me, I don't like that. I think I wouldn't like to have a friend who had that tendency. Do I think that makes him per se a bad president? Well, if we find that the disgust is concentrated in certain areas that are also areas of group subordination, as with women, yeah, I mean, it does worry me. There is a kind of phobic misogyny in Trump. I don't think that he has the belief that women are inferior. There are lots of reasons to think he doesn't have that belief, but he has some kind of phobic reactions that are actually quite troubling.